Joining us now, Newt Gingrich, possible and likely presidential candidate, of course, former Speaker of the House, and he joins us now. Newt, I'm confused. I've been away for a week, but I come back and all hell is broken loose. The president's in Brazil doing some soccer ball kicking over there, apparently, and Mullen and saying one thing, and it looks like the president kind of saying another.
Well, I think that you've got sort of opportunistic amateurism is the best term I could give you, that the president is totally confused. He said on March 3rd, Gaddafi has to go. Then he did nothing. Then the French took the lead in the United Nations. Then the president turned around and was supportive of the French lead. Now we're currently for a humanitarian ceasefire, except that the French I think, have killed 70 tanks so far. And since a no-fly zone can hardly involve tanks, none of which, to the best of my knowledge, currently fly, you clearly have confusion in the coalition. The Arab League, which was supposedly for this, has now come out and said, well, they're not for it the way it's being done. This thing is a mess. And what's more important for people to realize is Libya is a sideshow. Bahrain, where the Saudis and the Iranians are in conflict, is huge. Syria, which has been killing civilians who are protesting. In Yemen, the armored divisions switched sides yesterday from the government to the rebel forces. In Egypt, over the weekend, they released 20,000 prisoners, many of whom I suspect are jihadists who will be back in the field trying to kill us. People need to understand that the larger picture is even worse than Libya, and Libya is a mess.
Well, if you were in charge, what would you have done? Would you have gone to Brazil?
Well, yes, he should go to Brazil. That's a state visit. They planned it for weeks. And the President of the United States can exert power from many places. I've reminded everyone that under Eisenhower and Reagan, the President would not have said on March 3rd, Gaddafi has to go. The President on March 3rd would have said to the CIA and to the military, I think Gaddafi should leave, and I prefer he leaves quietly, and I think you should communicate sincerely with him and the military. And they would have pressured in a variety of ways that did not involve making lots of noise. We used to be very good at managing dictators who had outlived their time, but we didn't do it by having long, elaborate, complex public negotiations.
No, I hear you, Newt, but the president's over there. President's over there kicking a soccer ball and laughing it up with the. I got to say, I got to disagree with you. I don't like to disagree with you because I think you're really smart, but the president, I think, looks incredibly foolish over there. I mean, the world is blowing up. Bahrain, Yemen is an incredibly important ally to us. That thing is completely deteriorating. Japan is crying out for more assistance. And yet we have a photo on page A8 of the Washington Post of the president kicking around a soccer ball.
Well, look, I'm not going to defend Obama's capacity for paying attention to trivia. Last week I was very critical of him for getting engaged in the Final Four and the brackets for basketball, and I made exactly your point, which is at a time when the Final Four ought to be creating jobs, protecting America, balancing the budget, and controlling the border, the idea that he has spent a fair amount of time on basketball rankings just struck me as a total abdication of his job. But you didn't ask me if I thought he ought to kick soccer balls. You asked me if you have a long-planned state visit to a major country, I think presidents have an obligation to go through with them. That doesn't mean they can't be serious and solemn.
Yeah, the state visits always seem to coincide with spring break. It's just, I'm sorry. I think the way it comes across to the American people is, you put it off for a couple of weeks. I mean, and maybe you're right. Maybe if he had a clear vision from the beginning, it would have looked a lot better. But I think it clearly doesn't.
Well, Laura, my question for you would be, what leads you to believe if he stayed home and spent every day in the White House, it would be any better?
That's true. It'd probably be golfing.
This is an amateur team engaged in amateur opportunism, and I think there's no evidence that they have a clue what they're doing. It's truly a little frightening. You can be fairly incompetent domestically, and it increases the deficit or it weakens the economy. But if you're incompetent in national security matters, it has really big long-term problems.
And Newt, when I've been watching this whole thing play out and listening to some of the possible Republican presidential candidates chime in, and I listened to George Will on ABC yesterday, and he seems to be pretty solidly against American involvement in this Libya issue, because we don't seem to know what's really at stake here. Now the benchmark is, well, we're going to act when a tyrant shows no mercy to his people. That's a pretty broad statement of when we should intervene.
Look, the question I raised the other day about that was, okay, does that include, Mugabe in Zimbabwe? Does that include the Sudanese dictatorship, which has killed several million people? Does that include the folks in North Korea? I mean, I don't understand what the Obama standard is, except it looked good in the New York Times editorial page or something like that. I mean, I just think that there is a real problem with the way they're approaching this stuff. They have no grand strategy for the Muslim world, and I would argue we're losing ground. In fact, I'm going to call on the Senate and the House to hold a series of hearings reviewing 10 years after 9/11, because I think we're actually losing ground. And I think we need to be honest about it and confront it. They have no standard for intervening in Libya that can be applied with any kind of honesty to the world at large. I mean, it's an intellectually very dishonest administration that has no objective standard that you could use to apply to anything.